Welcome to Adult Forum. I'm Pastor Hilly. With racial tension across our country at a fevered pitch, artists of all kinds, poets, authors, musicians, and filmmakers are adding their voices to a very complex and very real conversation in our nation. Adding their voice to that conversation is Regina King, with her first movie, One Night in Miami, which came out in the year 2020 and brings together Malcolm X, Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, and Muhammad Ali for a fictitious conversation one night in 1964. Here to talk about this movie and the state of love and trust of our community and our nation at large, my good friend and Whitehall resident, Lamont Sanders. Lamont, thanks for coming, man.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Appreciate you being here. Now, I know about this movie because of you. You know, you were the one who like, hey, you got to watch this.
Right.
So, can you give me a little breakdown of the film, and then primarily, why do you recommend this movie?
Yeah, so the thing about this movie, particularly, one of the main reasons that I thought you would enjoy it is because it's one of those movies that leaves you with a lasting takeaway or impact. It's something after you watch it, you really feel something. You really feel that sense of gravitas in the movie. You feel that sense of just questioning and kind of internal struggle. They really captured it in a really good way. But essentially, it's about Muhammad Ali after he wins his first title and he goes out to celebrate kind of with the fellas, so to speak. And what makes it cool is just the dynamic between all of the characters. So, these are all individuals that are extremely prominent in their respective fields, but they're also a really close sort of group of friends. So they get to talk about things in a very real, visceral way, but also they represent, this certain magnitude and platform. So it's kind of cool to see the dynamics of somebody like Malcolm X as we know him, as opposed to how he would be perceived by his friends or people that are close to him. So it's a really cool dynamic. They have some really great dialogue, and they do this cool thing where they really have a way of building up tension. It's not a whole lot of action per se in the movie.
Right.
It's mostly just discourse and conversation and dialogue, but you still get that sense of heaviness and impact from it. So it's definitely one of those movies where you watch it and you feel like, wow, like I really kind of learned or, gained some type of perspective from this, which makes it really cool.
No, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. The movie, it is like 98% dialogue, right?
Yeah.
But it builds tension in so many different ways that constantly kind of keeps you engaged and moves the plot along in different ways. It's February 26th, 64. Muhammad Ali beats Sonny Liston, world champ. You got these four guys who are all friends, who all have connections, and you're like, all right, Muhammad Ali just won the world title.
Right.
They should be on top of the world.
Yep.
But instead of like going out and celebrating, Malcolm X gets him in a room, almost forcefully.
Yeah.
And
selfishly,
yeah.
For sure.
As if we're going to have these conversations because I don't care how much we're celebrating. There's still work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like we're still moving forward. We're still part of the movement.
Right.
And I think that, in the modern era, in 2021, to look at a movie based in 1964, there's this question that we would like to look at it and say, well, good things, times have changed, or a good thing that times have gotten better.
Good thing we don't have to deal with those types of things
anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm like, don't we? Like, you know what I mean? Just looking at, especially in the past week, looking at just kind of, or the past 18 months, I feel like asking that kind of question is almost self-serving and shallow, because it kind of allows me to go like, well, that was in the 60s. That was like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah. Yes, it's definitely not indicative of, somebody who's really paying attention to what's going on in the world, because if so, you would see that while things have progressed and changed, just, technology has changed, time has changed, the way that we do certain things has changed, but, people's same biases and perceptions and fears and some of these structures that were set in place, a lot of that hasn't changed. So a lot of that, this is why you can watch a movie like this in this day and age and it still feels so relatable. And I know we're kind of going to get into this a little bit, but even that opening scene where you talk about the tension. Well, I think what makes that so critical, and this is something that we've spoken about before, but just a sense of, you can see Jim Brown's character kind of in that opening sort of dialogue. He's guarded, he's skeptical, he's hesitant, because you have this person who's essentially singing his praises, and he's praising them, as a football player, even as a man, and talking about how much honor and respect that he has for him. And then you quickly see how that shifts and that plays out. But you see him slowly start to relax, and he's like, okay, maybe all white people aren't like that. That's from his perspective, maybe that's what he's thinking in his head. Okay, there are a few people that may be allies, and a few people who actually look at me, for who I am. And then he slowly starts to relax, and then he's like, you know what, let me do something for you to show you, kind of that I appreciate you. And then, he feels like, we're equals. And then it quickly changes, and you see that perspective come out. And what he says to him, you really feel his kind of just shock, because that makes it so relatable to me and a lot of people that I know, because we do have to kind of walk around with that guard sometimes, right? You have to protect yourself. You want to basically have that guard up so nobody can, strike you, or, make you feel less than and catch you off guard. You want to be prepared for it. So you have to sometimes put yourself in certain situations. You have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to look at where you are, and you have to kind of have that guard up to protect yourself, because there's a chance that somebody may look at you and feel like you don't belong here, or, this is not a place where you should be, or different things like that. So that scene is really critical, because like you said, it sets the tone. It shows you that tension. But that's something that definitely, as Black people, we still have to be mindful of to this day. You want to be kind of trustworthy and open up to people, but you have to be careful. You kind of still have to have that guard up a little bit.
Do you think it's can we set the scene, or do you think it's too much of a spoil?
For sure.
So Jim Brown, who played, like, you are my football friend. So he played for the Browns?
Yeah.
I should know that. That's an Ohio thing, right? So he played for the Browns, had this record, grew up in Georgia, I believe, St. Simon's Island. That's at least where the scene is set.
Right.
And so he's back in his hometown, and he's meeting with this kind of like old white patriarch. And he comes in and sits on the porch, and the guy's daughter, brings lemonade, and very, very hospitable. All those parts of like Southern hospitality that we would think about. Great conversation. How are your parents? How are this? And again, you're 100% lures them into the sense of security and the sense of like, oh, this is where I grew up. I'm fine.
Yeah.
And then his daughter, the daughter of the patriarch, comes up to him and says, hey, Daddy, we have to move this furniture.
Right.
And so you got Jim Brown, he's an NFL player, and he's like, hey, you want me to help you move that furniture? Right. And he goes, well, I'll edit this, but, we don't allow your kind in the house, and just turns around and walks off.
Yeah, and he says it in such a way, just like, like, of course not. What the rules are. As much as I like you, I couldn't possibly have you enter my home.
Right.
But you see Jim Brown's body language at the beginning. He starts off very, he's just kind of like, okay, like, he's just kind of respectfully just sitting there, not really engaging in too much. He's listening. He's hearing it, but he's not really digesting it. And then he just keeps going. He's just really lauding, giving all the accolades and the praise. And then you kind of see in Jim Brown's head, he's kind of like suspicious, but he's like, it seems genuine, but I don't know. Like, why would he be talking to me this way? But then as the conversation moves forward, he's kind of like, okay, well, I guess he genuinely does respect me, and he views me, as an equal. So he's like, out of the, the kindness of his heart, good faith, again, like you said, this is a professional, athlete, football star, legend. And he's just like, let me help you move your furniture, just return some of that perceived kindness. But then after that comment, you just see him, it's just like a reality check. It's a slap in the face. And it's just like, we can relate it to even now, how people talk about certain athletes shouldn't speak out on social issues and different things like that. It's just, again, no matter what level or, whatever platitudes that you have, no matter what, heights you reach, again, there's still a certain segment of people that still view you as less than and feel like you're not deserving of that praise and those accolades. And they can even like you. They can even genuinely like you. They may like what you do. If you're an entertainer, they may like your music. But at the end of the day, as a person, they still kind of view you, at a certain level, despite what you've done and what you accomplished, and despite that they may like you to a certain extent. It's a weird dynamic to think about, somebody who may like you for what you do, but still not respect you as a person.
Right.
It's kind of interesting to think
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Or not see you as an equal.
Right, exactly.
You know, and we were talking about this before we started rolling today. Like, I think that's what that scene, and like we were talking about Malcolm X earlier,
yeah,
those are the two sides of the dichotomy that create the tension for so much of this film, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like the echoing voice of that patriarch, who's, you know, oh, you're great, Jim Brown. You're great at what you do, but we're obviously not the same.
Yeah,
and you're not allowed in the house because you
right.
know better than that, right?
Yeah.
And this desire, this unquenchable fire of desire that Malcolm X has,
mm-hmm.
who's beyond the question of sameness,
mm-hmm.
and he's onto the demand for equality.
Right.
And like that tension. And that idea of like, how does sameness and equality, how do they interact? What's the difference between them? What's the difference in like treating people with sameness and treating people with equality? And you and I were talking about this just before we started rolling, because I was like, I don't know if I want to ask this question. I don't know if it's a good question. Or I just think maybe it's just that it's a really hard question. And it's about how we frame it.
Yeah, definitely a tough question. Like, but as soon as you said it, it kind of, you know, like I said, I had thought about it not in that exact way, but just the idea of it. And then what we kind of came to was, you know, from my perspective, I feel like being treated the same does probably mean being treated, you know, equally, but being treated equally doesn't necessarily mean being treated the same.
Correct.
So, you know, I kind of explained it as, you know, we want obviously to have the same rights and same access to different things, and, you know, be able to just exist in the society equally. You know, I want to be able to get the same opportunities and, you know what I'm saying, different things like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be viewed as the same.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know that we're different. You know, I know that we have different upbringings, different backgrounds, different cultures, all of that type of stuff, different families. But I want you to be able to say, despite that, I still respect you and I still view you as an equal. It doesn't mean that you don't see and recognize our differences, right?
Right.
It just means that despite that, you accept it and acknowledge it, you still can respect me as a person.
Right.
So we don't necessarily want, you know, our identity to be raised. Like I talked about the whole I don't see color thing.
Right.
You know, you may not mean it maliciously if you say something like that, but practically speaking, that's just not realistic.
Right, yeah.
I know that, you know, this person is a white person, or this person is a black person, or this is an Asian American person, or whatever the case may be. I know that we may have different values and different backgrounds and different upbringings, but that's okay. It's fine. I can accept that. And we can still, you know, come together and be equal in that sense, as far as just being people in the society. So, you know, you don't necessarily need to not see that I'm black, but I would hope that you can recognize that I'm black and still be able to treat me as an equal and be respectful of it.
Because I think that I think people often don't stop to, or white folks, let me be specific about what I'm saying. I think that white folks say, well, I don't see color all the time. In the most well-meaning way.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it comes from a well-meaning place that maybe doesn't have enough thought behind it for all the reasons that you're saying. Because again, like if you're in that dominant culture, you know, like I don't say everybody, I don't see any differences in anybody. Then the other side of that is you're robbing all the other individuals of culture and heritage and family of origin. And you're just assuming that, like, you know, everything was, you know, everything's like mine.
Yeah, right.
And that's very problematic because, again, I'm just literally repeating what you said. But I can look and say, okay, well, we all have these different experiences and find that equality as human beings. It's the difference, I mean, theologically between unionism and pluralism. You know, unionism, that idea that there are all these world religions, but we have to boil them all down and there can only be one.
Right.
And pluralism is the idea of like we can all be in the room and have a conversation.
Right.
I'm like, cool, you're Baptist, I'm Lutheran, that's fine.
Yeah.
Let's celebrate our differences and learn from one another and have a good time. Because, and you and I have talked about this in another really interesting way, a rabbit hole I'd like to jump down, which is when we think about how we interact with, you know, our friends versus our family versus our work colleagues, we all kind of operate those in different ways. You know, I would always tell kids on mission trips, look, the jokes you tell in the locker room and the jokes that you tell at parents' night are really different jokes. And you got to be able to read those situations differently, right? And so, like, so obviously not the same, but there's that equality across that, or at least should be, between your friends and your colleagues and your family.
No, I think that's actually a really, really good point, because it's something that, we talk about a lot. Is, we call it code switching, basically.
That's where I was going.
Yeah. And it's just that idea of, there's certain aspects of Blackness that aren't necessarily considered to be professional or acceptable in certain types of environment. Like, the most common example would just be in a work environment, being in a professional setting, being in the office. And yeah, there's conversations that I would have with people that I'm close to, my friends, that I wouldn't necessarily bring into the office. And I think that there's true for most people, right? Especially in a professional setting. But I think there's that added aspect, because I've seen conversations where wouldn't necessarily consider to be work appropriate conversations, but depending on who you are, what you look like, you may be able to get away with that.
Right.
But there's definitely conversations where there's no way that I could kind of broach these subjects, or I could speak a certain way in the office, because people are going to be looking at me almost doubly negative in that sense, because they're looking at the what's traditionally unprofessional, and then also, again, that aspect of Blackness that people just aren't comfortable with.
Right.
Even down to the way that you talk. When people tell you, you'll hear Black people talk about this a lot, but being told that you speak white, which is basically again, you're just grammatically correct, and you're not using certain, ebonics and different things like that.
Right.
And I think that represents a interesting dynamic, because I think as you get older and you realize, kind of see the world for what it is, you're like, I don't feel like I should necessarily have to shy away from just being comfortable and just being, myself, and speaking the way that I do. Instead of just looking at it where it's just like, okay, well, we need to just accept that this is professional and this is not. Maybe we should start questioning and say, well, why isn't this considered professional?
Right.
Why is it okay in this sense and okay, not okay in this sense? And what does it even mean for something to be professional? So I think, as a Black person, and then even, as a white person who's trying to kind of understand and get on the other side of that perspective, that's a tough conversation to have. It's like, where do you kind of just poke and prod and challenge, like, what's traditional versus not traditional, and where does that end? Where do you land there? Because again, there's so many things where it's realistically, this is just the way that it's done, but it's probably rooted in some kind of deep-seated, maybe racist ideals. But it's not always easy to just poke at certain things and break it down. It's not easy to just go into a work environment and say, okay, well, I'm just going to choose to not speak this way, even though it could potentially affect my standing. It's definitely an interesting kind of battle that happens a lot.
And I really appreciate you pointing to like the roots of things, right? Because if you look at the roots of American culture, which since the founding of America has been like a white dominated culture. So when we ask like, what is professional?
It's whatever white people said it was, and it's like,
And the history of America is like white people like almost having to play catch up once they were forced into that, to be like, all right, there are people who aren't white in the room. Well, you just keep doing what we're doing.
Right.
And that's not an equal table. Like that's not an equal field. That's like, all right, like, come on and catch up. That'd be like me going out for the NFL and then being like, you got to catch up on our level. And I'm like, all right, this isn't working. Right. This is not working at all. And the hard part, I think, for a lot of like white culture in those conversations is people will say, well, I didn't do that. That was generations ago. That I didn't do that. But I even think about the Civil War, where, thankfully the North won the Civil War, and then they went to the South, and it wasn't like they broke up all those plantations and gave the actual farmer, not the owners, but the African Americans doing the work. It's not like they gave them the land scot-free. They definitely took a lot of that wealth back north with them. And they're like, oh, look, the South's bad, and like all this sort of thing. And again, like it was, right? Slavery is inevitably bad. But there's that whole reality of then people in the North who are like, well, we weren't slave owners. I'm like, but you had the opportunity to do something really good there in the culture.
For sure.
And you chose not to because of fiscal gain. So you did not do that bad thing. But you definitely gained financially from other bad things.
And that's definitely something that's still prevalent nowadays, as far as, I've heard so many people, make that counter argument, like, well, my family didn't own slaves, or, different things like that, or, you're not currently enslaved. And it's just like, well, we're really going to sit here and just, try to erase, the history, and how those effects still persist and last to this day, right? It's not just about, you personally saying that you did this or you didn't do that, but what have you been a witness to? What
Right.
have you seen in your own internal family or inner circle that you accepted, that you didn't call out?
Right.
So maybe you're not personally or intentionally, perpetuating certain, ideals and things of that nature, but there's probably situations where you didn't necessarily speak out against it and call it out. There's probably situations where you could have presented yourself as an ally, but you chose to take the easy path and just kind of turn away from it and not really dig into it and have those uncomfortable conversations about what's going on. There's probably situations where you could have just been an ally by lending an ear and making someone feel heard, and just not automatically dismissing an experience that was different from your own. You know what I mean? So those types of ideals still persist, where people just, they want to take comfort and solace in the fact that, I didn't personally do this. And even like the whole, I have Black friends, and that type of thing, you know what I mean? So that's just an easy way to prevent yourself from having that uncomfortable discourse and dialogue surrounding those things. Because if that was going to be your response, and you're saying, okay, well, I have Black friends. Well, how often do you listen to them? What do you guys talk about?
Right.
Is it just surface level things that, you guys may have in common, depending on your neighborhood or whatever? Or are you actually taking a deep dive and talking about some of those deep rooted, uncomfortable, things that they've had to experience that they may not even feel comfortable telling you? So, yeah, there's definitely that idea where people just, want to avoid responsibility, putting it off on their ancestors or putting it off on people in other spaces, and just saying, well, I had nothing to do with that.
Right.
Really, that's kind of the point. Yeah, because you could have been a positive sense of change. So.
Yeah. And the other part of that is, I don't know, I feel like if someone's auto response is, I have Black friends, or, well, I didn't own slaves, then they're making it about them.
Right, for sure.
And it's like, it's not about them.
Yeah.
It's about the bigger issue. And it's about like changing the way people think.
Yeah.
And I think that in and of itself, like that kind of like psychological, like seismic shift is really hard.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's a lazy thing to say that, oh, that's really hard, so we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right?
And you know what's funny? Like to kind of circle it back to what we were talking about earlier, having that guard up, right? It's this whole thing where, well, all white people aren't this or that. Realistically, probably not. I think it's reasonable to assume that every single person in a race is not the same, doesn't have the same exact behavior and ideals and beliefs. That's fair. But do we have the luxury, the benefit of the doubt, to be able to just say, oh, well, maybe not? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's a risk that you're taking. You know, when you go into a certain environment, when you interact with people, it's a risk for you to just assume that somebody is not this way. Because, if they are, and you let your guard down, then there's consequences that come with that.
Right.
So sometimes we don't necessarily have the luxury of giving people the benefit of the doubt. We have to be kind of in the back of our mind. There's that thought, right, where it's just like, this could go a certain way. Let me just have my guard up. What I'm saying? I'm not going to treat you a certain type of way. I'm not going to, not go out and hang out with you and talk. But in the back of my mind, I'm just prepared just in case anything goes wrong. You know what I mean? It's like that type of thing. So we don't always have the luxury of just, giving people the benefit of the doubt and just saying, yeah, you're probably not racist. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
We got to assume that there's a chance that you could be, so we carry ourselves accordingly.
And even with that, you're kind of like identifying this like daily anxiety of, and I don't know why, but I keep almost singing back to the code switching conversation, right? Like, if I'm going from here to, visit our friends at Two Tones, I have a 5-minute drive where I get to like shift gears.
Yeah.
Or, going home or whatever the case is. I'm like, all right, cool. I don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah.
And like, at the end of the day, that's a luxury.
Yeah.
Like that is a cultural luxury to be like, I don't have to worry about anything for the next 20 minutes. I'm gonna go run from like my house in South Linden to OSU because I need 40 minutes without worrying about anything.
Yeah, when you feel like you could just literally just exist and just be yourself no matter what environment or situation that you're in, that is a luxury, but that's kind of what we're seeking, right? That's part of that equality that we're looking for, which is like, I could just be my natural self and just act the way I normally would, and you don't perceive it as a threat or anything like that. I can just be me, whether I'm here, whether I'm at Crafted Culture or at Two Tones. You know, I can have the same conversations, I can tell the same jokes, I can laugh about the same things, I can just kind of exist.
Right.
But you know, there's no caveat with it. So.
And, you know, one of the things that makes it really hard is that I think you and I can think of a lot of examples of similar events that are not going to be viewed the same.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, on an average night in Whitehall, you and I go out by ourselves, do the exact same things, and they're going to just be read and engaged with in different levels. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you and I, car by ourselves, get pulled over.
Yeah.
Like my initial response is like, oh man, my insurance premium's going up. Where did I leave my, where did I leave my insurance card or whatnot? Like those are the first thoughts that go through my mind. Yeah. You know, or things like even just like walking through town at night, you know, like I love running at night. And I realized moving back to town pretty early that, you know, I go out after dark and go for a run. Yeah. I kept getting stopped by people kind of like people like doing their job, like community, what do you call them? Like there were police officers, but also like community, what do you call them? OSU. They're not actually cops. But
like campus security.
Yeah, like campus security. And there's like, are you okay? Yada, yada, yada. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm fine. Yeah. But again, I realized that that's not the same experience for everybody.
Yeah, when it comes to, you know, law enforcement, which is always, you know, kind of a touchy subject, but, you know, let's call it what it is. You know, we don't view law enforcement the same way because we've been taught and conditioned, again, to keep that guard up and to protect ourselves. So, you know, I may go into an environment, I'm not necessarily worried about the people there themselves, but I'm worried about how they perceive me. Because, again, if they perceive me as a threat, then the, you know, authorities and law enforcement get involved, and you know, they have a penchant for, you know, taking a certain side, like they're coming in, you know, with the mentality of the people that called them in the first place, which is like, this person is a potential threat, a potential criminal, and they're kind of, again, looking to be on the offensive. So yeah, there's certain things that we're taught, you know, that you just shouldn't do. Like, yeah, you know, you can't be, depending on where your area, you know, running around at night, not necessarily because you think that the people in that environment are going to do something to you, but because, again, their misconceptions and their fears may lead to something else. You know what I'm saying? They may take something that is just as innocent as just jogging and kind of minding your business as this person is up to something. Now let me get the authorities involved. And, you know, like we talked about earlier, where I think you were making the joke about like, being on campus and like, you know, asking a cop to like, you know, go up and like buy you some food or something because, you know, whatever, like you're too drunk or something like that. Like that would never be a thought to even cross my mind. You know what I'm saying? Like go up to the cop and do what? Like be friendly with the, you know what I'm saying? Because, you know, again, we were taught that they, you know, traditionally, as we've seen, you know, recently with so many events happening, but, you know, it's just that idea that they're always looking to kind of be on the offensive and strike first, and you don't want to put yourself in that situation, right? You don't want to be, you kind of want to just, as a Black person, especially as a Black man in America, you want to minimize your interaction with, you know, the law enforcement as much as possible, even when you're not doing anything. Right. Like I was just telling you about, you know, how my mom, who is 75, she's probably, you know, broken some laws in her time, but not any time recently. You know what I mean? So she got pulled over, and it was probably for something simple as just not signaling the turn. But, you know, she almost had a panic attack. You know, she was kind of on the verge of just breaking down. She was just telling me how, you know, nervous she was to the point where she almost couldn't even get her, you know, ID and stuff together. And she hadn't done anything, you know, she didn't break any laws, but, you know, again, just that perception and, you know, how law enforcement tends to view and treat, you know, Black lives in this country. yeah, we always have that fear in the back of our mind that this could just go left at any moment. We don't know what could potentially set somebody off, and
Right.
doesn't really seem to matter, how old you are, or, criminal background, no criminal background, compliance or non-compliance. It doesn't seem, it just seems like there could always potentially be a trigger no matter what. Right. You know what I'm saying? So.
I mean, and you and I are recording this. It's February. It's April 23rd.
Yeah.
So what? 2 days ago, 15-year-old right here in Columbus calls 911 because of something happening in front of Micaiah Bryant.
Yeah.
And it ends with her death.
Yeah.
In the hands of a law enforcement officer.
And it seems like that's how it goes a lot of the time. It ends in someone's death.
When she was calling 911.
Yeah.
And again, like, grow up as a white kid, like that's the first thing you do, and there's never any hesitance.
Yeah.
Because there's never that fear on the back end.
Yeah. It's like, what are the repercussions? There's no backlash for calling, 911 if you're, Caucasian for the most part. Like, it's just it's an easy, immediate solution to a problem.
Right.
When you're Black, you're looking at the problems it could potentially cause on top of whatever you're already dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Like, I would hope that I could just call somebody and calmly explain my side, and they'll be able to clearly see what's, rational, what's not, what's going on. They can objectively look at the situation, but you call them and then they end up pressing you as if you're the one. You're like, hey, I'm the one that called you guys.
Yeah.
That happens so frequently. They're not, you don't feel like they're there to really be your ally, because they're looking at you again as a potential threat. And that situation, same thing, it immediately ends in violence and the de-escalation tactics that they're trained to employ, that they seem to employ in other situations. It's like all of that training and all of that goes out the window when Black people are involved in it. It seems to always go immediately to, lethal force.
Right.
But we've seen situations where they are able to, apprehend someone without taking that action. It's just, do they want to? You know what I'm saying? Do they have the patience and diligence to do that? Does the system care if they don't? Right? Like that type of thing. They seem to have this sense of, brotherhood, where it's just like, you're going to do whatever you do, and we're going to look out for you either what, no matter what, whether it's right or it's wrong. And we always joke about, how you'll see certain videos where, person is clearly threatening the officer. They may even be wielding a weapon or advancing towards the officer, doing something, and it's just warning after warning. And it's just, you know what I mean? And it's just like, like, I'm not saying that we want, you to be lethal in that case. We don't want you to be, that's not the equality that we're seeking. We're not saying, enact the same violence on us that you do to other people, but it's quite the opposite. We're saying if you can find ways to resolve the situation without resorting to that in this case, why can't you do it here?
Right.
Or why does it seem to be so disproportionate at least?
Yeah, it's not the equality of violence. It's the desired equality of, well, what's the word I'm looking for? Not pacifism, but it's finding that second path.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Huh. And even to think back to this idea of equality and, talking about the equality desired across our country, which you pointed to, like the equality we wanted is the equality to be ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
Across the board. And when we think about,
or to just be left alone sometimes, you know what I mean? Like that's a sense of peace and kind of equality in itself, where a person can just mind their business, and you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what they're up to, but it's okay. Right. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you're not concerned about it because you don't really think that they're a threat. They're just minding their business.
Exactly.
Sometimes there's that aspect, not to cut you off, but sometimes there's that aspect of, it's like you have to be accounted for. Like, we need to know why you're here, what you're doing, and what you're up to. Like, I'm not even free enough to just kind of mind my business. Like I don't, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but, as a white person, do you frequently feel like you have to go in situations and kind of just be accounted for and explain why you're there and state your reasoning? You could go in and not necessarily have a purpose or a mission and just kind of be in a certain area, and nobody's going to be pressing you. It's, what are you doing here? Like, can I help you type of thing, Yep. We get that a lot. It was just like, I can't pinpoint exactly what you're doing here. I can't figure out why you might belong here. So you must be lost, or you must need some help or anything like that. And then if I don't answer you and explain myself, then it's like, it's suspicious, right? And then when you go, what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
That type of thing. So.
Yeah. And to even talk, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out a way to articulate what you're saying is that equality of being able to walk around and not have to worry, right? In between, like we were talking about earlier, like code switching from moment to moment to moment. The constant anxiety of like feeling that need to provide accountability on some level. Like just those are just the first two examples that we've talked about that are never part of my everyday thought. Like I walk out the door, I grab my keys and my wallet and my phone. I'm not carrying that anxiety in any way, right? But again, like that is a privilege, right? And I don't know, I feel like to not acknowledge that, it would be really easy to be like, no, we're all the same. We're all living in America. It's the same experience. But that's like, well, if you ignore the evidence, like, then I guess it is, you know. If you ignore planes, I guess nobody flies, right? Other than birds. But those are those realities that I think it takes a lot of work in white communities to become aware of, and B, to become aware of even after we've become aware of them. You know, because like white culture, and I think that like the Jim Brown scene in One Night does this really well. In like, oh, Jim Brown, your record in the NFL is always going to stand, but like you still can't come in the house. Like we're going to elevate you to a certain point, like you were saying, we're going to congratulate you for what you're doing. But that's all right. And we're like, we as white culture will applaud that we let you do that.
Exactly, right, for sure. It's definitely that mentality of like we're allowing you to, do this and get to these heights. So it's fine. It's okay in that case.
And then to let ourselves off the hook, to be like, Jackie Robinson, integrated baseball. I guess racism's over.
Yep, guess we're done.
I guess we're, hey, Obama
what more do you want? Right,
Obama was a president. I guess racism's over. Like, no more after it. Like, good job, white people. Like, and again, like, that's just it's Jim Brown, the character Jim Brown in the movie makes this amazing comment where he goes, some white folks wait to pat themselves on the back for not being cruel to us. Which I rewatched the movie a couple of days ago, and that hit real hard. Especially because I watched it 2 days ago, actually, and I watched it after the Derek Chauvin verdict in Minneapolis, right? And so I'm listening to how he was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder and the killing of George Floyd, and hearing how that was covered in like NPR and on the radio and that sort of thing. And NPR made a very similar comment that I forget who the speaker was, but she said, white culture loves waiting around and giving itself these moments of like, hey, look, we finally did the good thing. I guess we're good now. Thanks, everybody.
And on top of that, a lot of these people, weren't on that side to begin with, what I'm saying? But they, along the way, they could have potentially got guilted into, well, now he's convicted. So, I guess I may potentially look bad if I don't kind of go along with it and say, okay, sure, we'll give you that one. You know what I mean? So that's definitely a good point for sure. And then also, I think another really powerful character in this movie, Malcolm X, who was really the glue of it. He presents an interesting point because like you kind of see him really basically harassing his friends almost in a sense where it's just like, where they should be out having a good time, just partying, celebrating, drinking, doing whatever, he's trying to push the envelope forward and he's trying to let them know that there's still work to be done. And he's trying to get them to understand that, you have a powerful voice, you have a platform, it's your responsibility. As a Black man in America, if you have people here, family, friends that you care about, if you want us to succeed, you have to do more. You have to continue to push and fight. You can't straddle the fence. You can't be on the line. You have to, be all in. That's an interesting point because, people are all different. Being Black doesn't mean that all Black people have the same experience. I'm sure there's Black people who may be comfortable with, what's going on in their life and what they see and be okay. And they may not necessarily want to ruffle certain things too much. They may want to just say, I'm cool with this and my experience is like this, so it's okay. There may be Black people who recognize inequality in certain things, that they want to change, but they may feel like, man, like I don't want to have to go through all of this hardship and struggle. I just want to kind of like do my piece, clock in, clock out, and move on. And then there's other people who, again, feel that sense of responsibility to actually take on the challenge of fighting inequality and, you know, trying to do everything within our power to make sure that we lead by example and we create a world that, you know, we always talk about, like our family and our, you know, children's children can live in, that type of thing. So it is very much a choice that you kind of have to make, you know, like it's not always just a given, you know, we don't have a choice. We're thrust in this position, but you have to decide, you know, what's it worth to you? You know, how much do you want to fight it? And that's a challenge that a lot of us face. Like, am I doing enough? Like, you know, is it worth pushing it here? You know, do I kind of just want to let this one go? And maybe, you know, what battle is worth fighting? And I think the point that Malcolm X was trying to make in the movie is that all of them, to be honest, like every battle, anytime there's a situation, you know, where you see inequality and you recognize an opportunity to do something about it, it's your responsibility to do so. So he's trying to get them to understand that, yeah, you know, what you're doing. I think he was talking about like Sam Cooke in particular, with everything that he was doing and trying to help Black people become more involved in the business aspect of it, and explaining how, you know, residuals work and giving people credits on the song. Cool, you're doing all of that on the back end, but you're not being outspoken like, you know, Muhammad Ali is. You're not using your platform to make a clear, hard stance that this is what I feel, this is what I think. So yeah, you can do all of that stuff on the back end, but at the end of the day, you still need to use your voice. You still need to speak out. You still need to kind of overtly fight, you know, for, you know, fight against injustice, that type of thing. So I really feel like he's the glue that kind of holds the movie together, and just representing that struggle. Also just showing you how annoying it is to potentially have Malcolm X as like one of your close friends, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, you know, it's like, let's go to the movies. He's like, no, let's go to the rally. Like, you know, we need to, you know, that type of thing. So that
was one, after I watched it, that was the first thing you said to me. You're like, man, how annoying was that?
For sure.
You couldn't even hang out because like you're on it.
And like everything is just like, you know, everything is framed in a way where it's just like, it's this existential kind of struggle, and everything is just like, you probably can't have simple conversations with them, but just about fun things, right?
Right. I mean, one of the questions I kind of drafted watching it 2 days ago was like, how does Malcolm X, in the confines of the movie, understand friendship?
Yeah.
You know, like that's a really powerful question.
Definitely.
You know, because I think it kind of gets to, it's another road into the conversation that you're identifying with him and Sam Cooke and even Muhammad Ali, right? Yeah. Because they all have different platforms in different ways. Yeah. But Malcolm's level of intensity of accountability to the cause is unwavering.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, he's like, I don't care what your platform is. You need to have it dialed up to 11.
Right.
And that kind of pushes.
Sam Cooke's character in particular.
Right? I like, as a white guy watching it, I think that one of the powerful things about that is to remind myself that, again, there's a lot of different ways to be supportive to the movement.
For sure.
You know?
And I think that was Sam Cooke's point that he was trying to make, is just like, you know, there's different ways of fighting, you know, quote unquote. And I think it's not that Malcolm X didn't understand that, but he also, I think it was a cautionary tale in terms of just like, you know, you have to remember, like, what are we ultimately fighting for? Our right to, again, like we talked about, to live and exist and be who we are, or our right to just be accepted in a sense. You know, you know what I mean? Like, it's, again, do we want to just kind of be acclimated and kind of lose certain facets of our identity, or do we really just want to say, you know, like, no matter what, this is who we're going to be, this is who we are, this is what we built, and whether you like it or not, by choice or not, you will eventually learn to accept this. We're not just going to acquiesce, and, you know, we're not necessarily trying to get along in the sense of just, you know, again, doing what you want us to do, but we're trying to fight and be equal, but still, you know, be who we are as people and not lose that along the way. So I think that's part of it, you know, like he talks about him. I can't remember the name of the club that he was going to, but it was really, really important for him to be able to succeed on that stage.
Mm-hmm.
But that stage is also, you know,
Copacabana.
Copacabana,
Yep.
in front of a bunch of white people. So it's just like, why is it so important for you to succeed there? Because again, that's kind of the pinnacle of what they set. That's the standard, you know, if you're an artist or, you know, musician, for you to be able to be accepted and kill it there is great. But, you know, why not go to a black space and be with your people, kill it there, and we'll be the ones to decide that, hey, you know what? Killing it at this club in, you know, Harlem is just as good as, you know, this place here. So again, it's that the movie is, when you really break it down, it's a lot of duality, you know what I'm saying? And it's a lot of things that, you know, whether you're a celebrity or just, you know, your average everyday person, you know, as a black person, you do think about some of those things. Like, you know, do we want to kind of build our own and make that equal, or do we want to kind of infiltrate, so to speak, and be accepted in these, you know, pre-established, you know, whatever it may be. It could be in music, it could be in movies, and you know, like, do we want to be accepted at, you know, the Academy Awards and this and that, or do we want to just create our own and do it that way? And that's the whole argument there, right? Like Sam's Cook is like, there's different ways to fight it. I'm fighting in my own way.
Right.
Malcolm's like, I get it, but you may lose sight along the way. You may ultimately, you know, kind of lose sight of the bigger picture. And that's why when it all comes full circle, right? And he's like, you don't think that, you know, I've had those internal kind of struggles and conversations. You don't think that, you know, I've considered, you know, doing more and using my voice, and I've written these songs where he takes a jab at him about Bob Dylan. You know what I'm saying? Like, basically having a song that inspired, you know, inspiration, talk about our struggle more than anything that he's ever done. That was deep. And and then it's also like one of those things where, like, where you're really close friends with somebody, like, they know how to push your buttons, they know exactly what to do to go deep. But he wasn't doing it to be malicious. I think he realized he got a little bit carried away, but there was a point to it. He really wanted him to kind of understand it. So when it comes full circle and he has that song and he's singing it on that stage in front of those people, right? Like, it's like that aha moment. He gets it. He's like, I can, you know, yes, there are different ways of fighting, but at the end of the day, it is important to make sure that you're outspoken and that you use your voice for not only yourself, but the point is that you're inspiring other people. Right. Like, you're inspiring other people who may be having that internal struggle. You're coming out and saying, yeah, what you're feeling is validated. It's true. You have a right to feel this way. And then, you know, we're going to get through this type of thing. Right. So, yeah.
Do you think that there's an internal tension in Malcolm X between moving the movement forward, which he's doing so passionately, and also an actual desire that there will be a end point in which that can be reached if he attacks it ferociously enough, especially in contrast, I would say, to at least Jim Brown and Sam Cooke, who seem to kind of be in the boat, like, it is what it is, and, you know, we're gonna move the needle a little bit, but we're never going to see the end of this. And I think that's also because of Malcolm X throughout that film kind of has this urgency, because he has that feeling. I mean, he's
like you said, it feels like death is in the air.
The death is in the air. But I almost find this paradox where he's working forward because he knows it's going to take, you know, he has this idea that this is going to take forever. But he holds that in parallel with, or in tension with, but there will be an end to it. Right. And I don't know. I just kind of, as you were talking about like how we all like move people forward. Yeah. Right. Because if there's not that end point, then what are we moving to? Right. However, that end point is never as crystal clear. Again, like we're talking about, it's like, especially white culture would like to say, like, we got a black president, we're good. Right. You know, like the Chauvin in Minneapolis was found guilty. I guess we're good. Like, now the struggle is over. Right. Which is really short-sighted on white culture's viewpoint. You know what I mean? And I think that's why those voices like, you know, Malcolm X and James Baldwin and Ta-Nehisi Coates, who you and I talk about often, for sure, are those like, they are the fires that are burning to move forward culture, doing their best to move culture, generally speaking. And I think that I forgot to write it down. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. One Night in Miami is based on a book. Kemp, I think is his last name. But I think that he really got the sense of that fire in Malcolm X's character.
Yeah.
Living in the now and the not yet.
Right. Yeah.
And having that drive to move forward. And I think that's that tension with Sam Cooke, who is living in the now.
Yeah, for sure. And he's like, again, he's like, I'm, getting people paid and doing certain things, and just like he's kind of like, his argument is like, you don't even understand all the good that I'm doing in my own way by being in this position. And I'm like, it just puts you in that mindset where it's just like, that's all well and good, but it's also kind of like, well, this is what we're allowing you to do. We're allowing this to take place, and this much is okay.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We're okay with conceding a little piece of the pie because it's inevitable, but we still, ultimately don't want you to have full access to it. So, and I think he also feels like, he has to be that kind of fire and that spark. That's his gift, right? That's his talent.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not a professional athlete. I'm not an NFL player. I'm not a boxer. I don't have a powerful voice as a singer. I can't move the needle in that way, but I can be this really, educated, passionate person who knows how to inspire and bring people together.
Right.
You're not always going to like it. That's kind of the point, right? It's going to be annoying sometimes. And I think you brought up a good point too, talking about, his internal struggle. Well, yeah, think about how much of a sacrifice that would have to be for him, right? Because you're choosing to live a life that's so deeply rooted in, getting people to understand, fight, and accept change, and putting yourself in harm's way, literally and figuratively.
Right.
And you're choosing to not really, like you said, live in the now and enjoy some of the aspects of, the positive aspects of life, because you're in a constant state of just, pushing people to succeed and be great. And then that has to be, because I think they even mentioned it in the movie at one point where they talked about, Sam tells him, he's like, you used to be so much more.
Yeah.
Right. Full of life. And that's his way of saying, you used to still at least be somewhat fun. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's just like, I don't have the luxury of taking my foot off the gas. And before I go, I need to do everything that I can to light a fire under you, and you, to make sure that this keeps getting carried forward after I'm gone. Because, I recognize that everybody may not be like Malcolm X and be the guy that sometimes come in and suck the fun out of the room and tell you, to get your stuff in gear. But, I need somebody who's going to still have that fire even after I'm gone. So that way, like you said, we make sure we're always still fighting towards that end goal.
Right.
And the end goal, that's a tough question, right? Like, how do you know when you're at the end?
Yeah.
And, it has to be one of those things where I don't think we'll ever be, just as a society, right? I don't think there's no such thing as 100% anything, right? There's always going to be issues and tensions and things that we have to examine. But I think when we're comfortable with having those conversations, and we can openly have that discourse, and we can look at something and say, no matter how long it's been here, where it came from, how it was established, let's take a hard look at this and see, is this right?
Right.
When we can openly and comfortably at least have those conversations, then I think, we'll be well on our way to whatever the equivalent of the end goal would be. But now you see it's tough to even have that open, like the way that we're talking here isn't necessarily how, normal people may interact, but it's something to consider, again, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, maybe I have, Black people in my life and, we have great relationships, everything seems good. But again, think about some of the conversations that you have. Think about how some of the struggles may potentially affect them and have a conversation about that. Open it up to a point where you can kind of have an uncomfortable conversation about something to see what you learn. I think that leads you towards that kind of end goal for sure.
Right. I mean, as you're saying that, and I really appreciate how you phrase that, to open yourself up to have uncomfortable situations, because we never know what the other person is on guard from in the conversation.
Yeah, right.
So you could be talking to somebody And you may feel really like I may feel really comfortable in a conversation, but that does not automatically assume that the person I'm talking to is going to feel comfortable in that topic. Or and I mean, you and I have hung out enough. I do this all the time, where I'll let the conversation get quiet, and then I'll assume you don't have anything to say, and then I'll just keep going. Right. But sometimes there has to be that invitation.
For sure.
And
making people feel heard.
Exactly. And in gender conversations, sometimes we get a bad rap because it's mansplaining. Like when we talk to women, like, well, let me explain to you how this works. Right. But culturally, I feel like that happens all the time too. I mean, did you ever get that where like someone's like, hey, let me tell you about the Black experience? You're like, wait a second, wait.
Right. I might know a thing or two about that.
But yeah, it's. I think I was talking to Zane, who said, one of the most important things for people to learn, and he didn't even say it that way. He goes, one of the things that annoy me the most about people is when they ask you a question, and before you're done answering, they're already telling you what they wanted to say. It's like a bait.
Right, for sure.
And that really kind of stuck with me, and I started listening to just people doing that in everyday conversations. Like, so if that's happening when we're talking about ESPN, then we need to be double on guard for like when we're having these hard conversations to open ourselves up to that vulnerability. And again, just to create that safe space. The other thing is we were talking about Malcolm. I thought about the most famous Malcolm X quote that's been scaring white folks for generations, the by any means necessary, and that iconic photo of Malcolm X. But especially if you think about that quote, even pull it out of context, in the frame of this movie, where again, he's talking to Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke, by whatever means necessary means like, all right, if you're a singer, sing. If you're an athlete, use that platform. If you're an academic, do that. If you live in a neighborhood, like, get to know people in your neighborhood. If you're a parent, like, we have an opportunity to like teach our children. Like, by any means necessary means it's kind of like again, cultural movement that doesn't stop at, the election of Barack Obama or the guilty verdict of, the guy in Minneapolis, or it's that reality that it does keep moving.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, even that, like you said, that quote in itself, so, divisive in a sense, because people, it's all about perspective sometimes and just how you interpret certain things, and people automatically attribute it to be, a call to violence, because, but you stop and ask yourself, well, why? Why does our mind automatically go there? Well, that's because, especially at the time, so much violence was being perpetuated against Black people, that you assume by any means necessary as a response mean that, we're coming back with whatever you're giving us. So we're going to be violent. If you're going to be violent, we're going to be violent back against you. But again, you're missing the overall point. Like you said, is by any means necessary. It's not just about, somebody hits you, you hit them back, which is definitely something he did talk about. But again, attacking it from all facets, and just putting yourself in a position where you're always going to be in a state where you can use whatever you have. You can use your mind, you can use your words, you can use your skills, and just in order to advance the culture forward, in order to fight back against that. So if you're thinking that it's violence, well, like I said, that's because at that time violence is being perpetuated against them. So
or that means if I, as a white person, read by any means necessary, I'm like, oh, they're going to be violent.
Right.
Why do I think that violent? Like, why is that my starting point? Because that tells me more about my acceptable reality than it does about the like Malcolm who wrote that. Right? It's that inward. Yeah, it's kind of like I think you and I were talking about this a little bit ago about like my whole thing about like hell and does hell exist or not. And some people, some people I'm like, yeah, I don't really think hell exists. And they go, well, if there's hell, if there's no hell, then you can do whatever you want to do. And I'm like, I really feel like that says more about your your ethics than it does my theology. Like if you need that fear. Like,
so you need hell just to, stop you from,
Yeah, that means you're not a good person. You just don't want to get caught.
Right, exactly. Right.
So if I read By Any Means Necessary, I'm like, man, they must be really violent. That really just tells me a lot about myself.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
Because you're right. Because again, you're not questioning the initial violence in turn. That's, like you should be asking yourself, well, like, geez, what would even lead a person to that? Like, what's, what I'm saying? Like, look at the kind of source and not necessarily the response. And then just don't look at the response in such a linear way. Like, again, we even the same thing with Martin Luther King. So much of his quotes and things and his movements get taken out of context. But you had to realize that they were trying to literally mobilize a whole entire group of downtrodden, disenfranchised people. And there's not necessarily a right or a wrong way. There's different philosophies, and they often overlapped. More than people thought. And you needed people to be able to, again, it's just really By Any Means Necessary applies to everything that all of them were doing. This person may have a different approach here, a different approach there, but ultimately they were all striving towards the same thing. But you need people who can attack it from this front and from this front, you know what I mean? So when just imagine any type of war, right? Like you want to be able to use whatever tactics that you can to get an advantage to fight it. You're probably not always going to come in with brute force against overwhelming odds or people with all the resources. So you got to be shifty, you got to be crafty, you got to use what you have in order to get the desired result. So, and
I really appreciate you using the word war, right? Because there are some people who say, well, it's not a cultural war. I don't think it's a cultural war, yada, yada, yada. I was reading the 23rd Psalm recently, Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And there's that 5th verse where it says, talking about the shepherd, you set a table in the presence of my enemies. And that verse always kind of stuck me really weird, because when you look at the definition of what an enemy is, there's this kind of intentionality. Right? And I'm like, all right, are sheep and wolves actually enemies, or are they just in the natural world?
Right.
And the more I think about that, I think that really depends on who you ask, right? Because if you ask the wolf if the sheep is an enemy, it's going to say, no, it's dinner.
Right.
Like it's hanging out in the field, it's easy picking.
Right.
Because the wolf is not threatened by the sheep or pressed by the sheep or worried about the sheep.
Yeah. And it's also like what they were born and bred to do. So it's just kind of like, that's just,
But if you ask the sheep if the wolf is an enemy, I think you're going to get a really different answer. Because the sheep lives in that anxiety and the fear, and the hooves and the wool are no match for claws and teeth and that kind of malicious gang mentality that wolves have, right? So to say, are they enemies? The oppressor is not going to think they're enemies. The oppressor doesn't care, because the oppressor has that privilege, as the wolf does. Whereas the sheep are, again, when we talk about mobilization and attacking it from every means necessary, and sheep get shepherds, and sheep find pens, and sheep do all these different things to protect themselves, because it is a daily battle for life.
For sure.
Because they're living in that anxiety. They're living as the prey. And I think that's a different reality. When we talk about like white culture, where we may say, well, the American experience is the same for everybody. I'm like, no, there's a cultural sheep wolf thing happening here. Where I would say like white culture, generally speaking, as the dominant culture, has that almost kind of wolf privilege. Because even like you're talking about with Sam Cooke trying to play the Copacabana, we'll let you succeed to a certain point.
Right, for sure.
But we're still in control.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, like you ask the sheep and you ask the wolf the same question. I think you're going to get really different answers based on who has the power in that privilege.
Yeah, and it's like, like you talked about the war, and to be frank, sometimes you just have to call it what it is. And I think sometimes the language of certain things throws people off, and it makes them feel uncomfortable when you talk about things so harshly, like when you say this is a war. But, to use your analogy, if you're the sheep and you've seen this violence be perpetuated against, your kind for so long, it's all you've ever known, essentially. And you don't necessarily see an end in sight. Well, how could you not look at that as a war, right? You know what I'm saying? And then conversely, on the other side, I think what also kind of throws people off is because, like you said, there's that, certain level of just you're the oppressor. So you may not see certain things, but not only that, but you got to realize that, to relate it back to some of the things that we talked about before, when people kind of distance themselves from things that happen, is that, you know, they may look at it and like see it a certain way because they're not on the front lines of the war, right? You're not the one leading the charge, you know, with the bayonet, you know, barking out the commands and ordering people to go in and do that. You know, you may just be somewhere, you know, far removed from it, you know, in the reserves or, you know, whatever the case may be, where you don't necessarily, you could be in the command center somewhere, you could be off of here, you could be there and not actively engaged on the front line. So you're not looking at it the same way as somebody. You're like, well, I'm not doing this, you know, I'm not, you know, my family didn't own slaves. I'm not out here, you know, being racist or perpetuating, you know, certain stereotypes and things like that. So from your perspective, you may say, okay, well, I don't really see, you know, because I'm not there participating actively in that. But again, are you kind of looking around you, not just internally, but just looking at the people close to you? Because sometimes you don't have to look that far, to be honest, right? Like, it's funny how many people that I know, how many white people tell me stories about, you know, there's always that, you know, racist grandparent or there's that side of the family or different things like that. And, you know, again, like you don't necessarily have to look that far. And I'm not saying that, you know, certain situations, you're probably not going to be able to change somebody's perspective on that. But there are situations where you can potentially call out something and have a lasting impact on that person, because it's that whole group mentality. You do certain things because you know that people around you are going to be able to support you, or at the very least, like, not stop you from doing that. So certain things get comfortable and you perpetuate certain things without even always trying to intentionally do it. So yeah, that whole sheep war thing is kind of a really good analogy, because again, there's so many different perspectives to kind of look at it from. But yeah, there's no way the sheep in that scenario could not look at it as a war,
as a battle,
it's
a
you're
fight
literally
for life.
fighting for your life,
and
that's what I think people don't understand. And that also just how you look at, you know, violence and acts of war. It's not necessarily killing somebody. There's psychological warfare, you know what I'm saying? And there's systems that put in place, you know, to prevent people and hold them back. So you got to kind of break down all of that to really understand why we say, oh no, this is a war, because it's being fought on all fronts.
I feel like we could do another like hour and a half on just like systemic issues.
For sure. Definitely a lot to unpack there for sure.
But hey, man, I want to be cognizant of your time. But Lamont, I always appreciate the conversation, my friend. Thank you for coming on and doing this. And man, I don't know, closing words, closing thoughts.
Watch the movie for sure.
Watch the movie, definitely.
One Night in Miami. You don't have to go in looking to get anything from it. Just watch it and see if you gain something from it. But just kind of go in with an open mind. And then just generally speaking, you know, anybody who could potentially be watching this, again, just be comfortable with not being comfortable, right? You know, find somebody close to you, and you don't want to force the issue, but just kind of listen and just, you know, see if you can connect to someone on a deeper level and kind of really start to understand some of the things that you mentioned before that they may be going through that you're just not cognizant of, you're not aware of. Be willing to challenge things like tradition and you know, certain things that we hold in high regard just because that's all we've ever known. Just be open to kind of questioning things and understanding another perspective and trying to really, you know, put yourself in that person's shoes and looking at it again, like from that sheep's perspective. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think, you know, having dialogue like this and discourse is one of the biggest things that's going to push the needle forward. You know, so even if you're on the fence, you know, you're not sure about certain things, or you've grown up a certain way maybe, and certain things have been passed down to you that are considered to be acceptable. Just be open to have a conversation about how some of those things could potentially be problematic. And, you know, most of the time, you know, we want to just kind of feel free to just be ourselves and exist. But, you know, a lot of us, we really want to advance culture forward in a significant way. So we're willing to kind of do the dirty work, and we're willing to really sit down and listen and have those kind of dialogues and discourse. It just has to come from a place that's genuine, right? So I think if we can kind of do that, then that's really going to move society forward in a significant way. So I appreciate, getting the opportunity to have these conversations, because I think it's really important, for sure.
You too, man. Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right, man. We'll catch you next time.
Definitely.
Bye, everybody.